Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me 320 Sim Pilot, and today we have another tutorial for you in the Boeing 777-300ER from PMDG in Microsoft Flight Simulator. I am a real-world Boeing 787 airline pilot. I'm also type-rated in the real world on the Boeing 777 as a result of this, and today I'll hopefully use some of that experience to give you some extra context on your home simulations and give you a complete guide on how to get this aircraft up and in the air. I have a previous tutorial already on the channel to show you how to get from cold and dark through to takeoff, covering all of the startup procedures and taxi out, and in this video we'll get you all the way from taking off up into the cruise. Even if you've never flown a Boeing before or a long-haul aircraft, this will cover everything you need to know, so right from beginners through to people who are experienced with it. Hopefully we'll give you those extra details on how we operate this aircraft in the real world. I'll also be covering how to set up the flight quickly from here on the runway, and the vertical mode of the autopilot, how we would handle it, how you retract the flaps, and all of these sorts of details. We're going to take off from here at Heathrow on a flight setting off down to Cape Town in South Africa. Let's get started. On the flight deck now, and we need to talk about some things to get the airplane ready to go. If you load up your simulator with the PMDG 777 already on the runway, then there's a few things you'll need to do. You can still follow my cold and dark tutorial to show you how to set up the CDU and the performance. I have those bookmarked in the video, so do please check out that video. That will describe it in full on how you would set that up. But what you'll find is that you'll have the CDU available to you in the normal way. So if you go to Menu, FMC, and then you can see all the usual sections. What you'll need to do is go to Menu, FS Actions, and set up the fuel as you want. So put in your total fuel figure. Then you can set up your payload as you want, so you can just type in the 0 fuel weight you want, or you can set a different weight and so on. And that's it. You can also, of course, load in your flight plan at this point. So if you go to your EFB, you can load in the data from SimBrief, and then that will show you the weight. So your 0 fuel weight is shown here, or you can see the full OFP, and you can see your 0 fuel weight here, 198.1. So what I did was went to FS Actions, Payload, typed in my 0 fuel weight in there, and same for the fuel. I just scrolled down, saw that the fuel figure is 97.2, so put 97.2 in here, although we're burning a bit sitting here on the runway now. So there you go, pretty straightforward. Then go to your menu, go to FMC, and then you can start at ident and load it in exactly the same way as I show in the cold and dark video. So check it's the right airplane. Position in it should already be working because it would already be aligned, so you can just go to route, and then you can route request and load in your route from your SimBrief flight plan, or type it in. To type it in, you press next page, and then you just type in the waypoints or the airways on the left and then the waypoints on the right, and that is available on your flight plan here. So you can just type in Maxit Yankee 803 Midhurst. So here you go, Maxit Yankee 803 Midhurst. Pretty straightforward. Remember, of course, once you've done that, you must press activate, which will appear in the bottom, and then execute, which will have that little white light to make it become active. Good. Once you've done the route, you can go through to the takeoff page, and in here you would set up your performance. Before you do that, just go to index perf, and you can request your perf, which will just load in the data from your SimBrief flight plan, or you can type it in yourself, so you'll know your 0 fuel weights because you'll have entered it, and then the fuel is calculated. It will give you the weights. You can put in your cruise level, your cost index that you'd like, so 310, cost index 85, it can be anything up to 99, so yeah, you can just type it in, or even higher, sorry, I think it's 999 on this, but yeah, type it in there, and then that'll take you through to thrust limit, which will be done from your performance. So you go to your performance tool on the EFB, type in your runway, and put in the information. You can just import it from the aircraft if you've loaded up your airplane already. Very straightforward, and hit calculate. This will then give you the numbers on the right, and you've got to do this in the right order. So on the thrust limit page, you're going to put in your rating, takeoff 2, and your cell temp 37. So this is where we derate the engine. So takeoff 2, reducing the engine thrust by 20%, and a cell temp of 37, so reducing it a bit more. Climb mode doesn't matter as much, but it will default to climb 2 if you do takeoff 2. Then you go through to takeoff, page 1 of 2, and in here you'll enter your flaps, which you can have from here, flap 5, and your speeds, 171, 175, 178, and yeah, it will also show you the trim you need to set, so trim 5.5, so I'm just going to set that down here on the trimmer. You see my diamond now, I'll just move that to the 5.5 position for takeoff. Good. Finally, takeoff ref 2 of 2 is where you can enter your acceleration height, so we're going with 1500 feet, which is what this is asked for. Good. That is pretty much the very basics. Something to note is you must have a departure already loaded in. So when you load your route, you must go to the departure arrival tab and then choose a runway and then a departure. So we were going with the max departure, and then again activate and execute those. If you don't do that first, it will actually delete all the takeoff data you've done. So yeah, make sure you do that first. So once you've loaded in your departure, then it will let you load in your speeds. If you try and load in the speeds without a departure, it might actually just say invalid. It won't let you do it. It needs to know a runway before it let you, because it says there runway 27 left. So it does need to know the runway. Good. Now, something that was missing in my previous video, and something that comes up on long haul, is this message here, insufficient fuel. Now this is a message you'll get if your flight plan is loaded, but the winds are not loaded. The reason is this is a long flight. This flight is expected to take, let's just have a look, because this is long haul now. On short haul the winds are important, but you can just put in an average, they're not quite as critical. This is 11 hours flight. So because this is such a long flight, it can actually make a big difference, that tailwind, as to the fuel figure you expect it to land with. So what we need to do is load in the winds, and that way the airplane will know and its predictions will be accurate, because at the moment it thinks we'll land with less than our reserves. Now I'm not quite sure, it expects to land 11.4 tons, which sounds like quite a lot, but if I go to our performance tab, I can see the reserves are 12.3. It wants us to land with 12.3 tons of fuel. At the moment it expects us to land with 11.4. So if you go to FMC.com and then wind, you can see that the wind data is available to load, because I downloaded it through SimBrief. So let's load the wind data. You can also, if you don't have the load option, you can just hit request and it will request it for the waypoints. And remember, you've got to press the execute button again. It's lit up in white, so execute. Then go back to FMC.com and do the descent forecast and load that in there. And that's in. You don't need to execute that one. And the 7.8 would also be a climb, but it doesn't seem to have that on here. I'm not entirely sure why, but there we go. And now you'll see the insufficient fuel message has gone, because now it expects us to arrive with 12.7 tons of fuel, which is more than the minimum it needed, and that's because those winds are a bit of a tailwind for this flight. So there you go. Here you go, descent forecast uplink ready, because I pressed it again by accident, so you can just load that in there. There you go. So that's what we need to do on long haul. You need to get those winds in on that page. Now, carrying on with this video, and what we're here to do is to take off and then follow through on all the climb modes. So let's have a brief recap of the takeoff procedure. First of all, we're going to release the parking brake and let the airplane roll along. Then we're going to set the N1 to 55% and hold a little bit of forward pressure on the yoke. Then, once the engines have stabilized at 55, I'm going to press this little screw here, which is effectively the same as pressing these toga buttons here. The engines will then drive themselves forward, because the autothrust system is armed. It will drive them forward to this green chevron, which is the takeoff N1 of 92.5%. It would say thrust ref in the FMA, which means it's targeting the reference thrust, this 92.5. We'll accelerate down the runway. That will then swap into hold. It will say hold on the left. What that means is the autothrottle system has let go of the thrust levers. They're now free to be moved by the pilots, but we don't want to move them. We leave them where they are. On a bouncy runway, that can be quite tricky. You actually have to have quite a loose grip at times to make sure you don't change them slightly whilst rolling along, although it's not the end of the world as long as they don't go too far, or you don't want to go less on the power. But there we go. Rolling down the runway, you'll then get to V1, which is our decision speed. Above that speed we can no longer reject the takeoff, and then you get to the rotate speed of 175. The aeroplane won't call that out. It will call V1, but rotate will be called by your other pilot, which you can set up in the menu PMDG setup. Rotate's going to be called. I'm going to then rotate the airplane, raising the nose from level up to 15 degrees. Remember to be gentle, because it's a long airplane. We don't want to strike that tail. It does have a tail skid, but we don't want to use it. Very, very bad news if you have. So rotate nice and gently, getting that nose up. The airplane will stand up on the rear axle of the main gear, so it will actually give it a bit more room to rotate. So don't worry too much about it, but yeah, it will give you a bit of time. So nice and gentle, nose up, and then keep rotating up towards 15 degrees, and then follow the vertical toga flight director, the magenta line there. Then you'll get the positive rate called. Again, you can set that up in the PMDG setup. Positive rate, gear up, and then we just keep climbing. We're going to climb up to our acceleration altitude of 1,500 feet, because we set that up in here on page 2, acceleration height 1,500. At 1,500 feet, it will then change from takeoff thrust, the TO, and it will change to climb thrust. When it reaches the climb thrust, it will reduce slightly, and we'll lower the nose, and then the airplane will target the next speed and start accelerating. At that point, we can start retracting the flaps once we get above the green speed. So when we're above the green 5, going towards the green 1, we can move the flaps from 5 to 1. Then we're above the 1, we can go to 0. Now your performance cap tool may actually give you a different flap setting for takeoff. You can take off at 15 or 20 degrees as well. If you're taking off at 15 or 20, the technique is still the same. You go from, let's say you're at 15, you go from 15 to 5 to 1 to up. If you're 20, you go from 20 to 5 to 1 to up. You don't have to do the 15 on that one. But there we go. Basically, you can just follow whatever number is next, whatever green number is next on the speed tape. And don't worry, I'll talk through all this once we are underway. Then we're in the air, and I'm going to talk through the vertical modes of the aeroplane, so using VNAV and the altitude window. I would recommend setting the altitude to thousands for takeoff, because it's most likely that's what you're going to need to change it by. If you need to change it by hundreds though, set it to auto, and then you can do that. Also, make sure you have LNAV and VNAV armed. LNAV means it will follow the pink line, it's lateral navigation. VNAV is called vertical navigation. That will mean it follows the vertical profile. Now, let's have a look at that vertical profile. If we look at our charts, we can see it here. We're going to take off, max it 1 Golf, and climb, and then turn left. And our vertical profile includes, let me just zoom in for you, stopping at 6,000 feet. So we're cleared to 6,000 feet on our departure, so that's the altitude you put in the window, your highest cleared altitude. Or your first cleared altitude. But you can see here there's an above 3,000 feet, above 4,000 feet, and then a level at 6,000 feet. So if I look into the legs page, I'll see those restrictions. You can see here it has above 3,000 feet, which is 3,000A. If it was B, it would be below. Next is 4,000 feet, again A above, and then it has flight level 60 and flight level 60 at max it as hard restrictions, so it wants to be at flight level 60. The first one is magenta because that is the restriction it's currently obeying. It's the first restriction on the flight plan, 3,000 or above, so the airplane will obey that. If that was below 3,000B, then it would actually still say the same in magenta, but what would happen is, by leaving it in 6,000 feet and flying in VNAV, it would obey the restriction. So although you've got 6,000 feet in the window, it would level off at 3,000. That's if it was a B. So for the below. So it will obey these constraints now, so you want to check them carefully to make sure they're correct. And we'll see the impacts of that once we're in the air, and how you can actually remove them once you're in the air as well if you want to keep climbing, because it's often air traffic will actually let you continue. So for now, our restriction is above 3, above 4, and then level at 6 for those 2 waypoints. So what we'll do is we'll see how that interacts. So that's how you check the restrictions. By the way, there could also be a speed limit. You can see here it's going to target 250 knots, so that's no problem today. Okay, before we go, you'll see one other ICAS warning, checklist incomplete norm. This is because we haven't done all the right checklists before takeoff. So to fix this, go to checklists over here, see checklists, and you can see the before takeoff checklist is complete. Now we've gone to it, it says it's complete, so therefore the message has disappeared. This is a bit of an issue with loading up the simulator halfway through, because the airplane is designed to do it in phases. So what you might need to do, depending on how you're worried about your checklists or not, if you get that checklist incomplete norm, what it's saying is you haven't done one in the right order. It's quite a clever system to make sure you don't forget. But yeah, if you get this and you have all these checklists, for example, now it thinks I haven't done the pre-flight checklist, then I can, and the way to check where it thinks you are is to go to a different page or close it all together and then press checklist. And this is the next checklist it's expecting to do. Now it's sitting on the pre-flight checklist. That's not good because the next one should be the after takeoff checklist. So I'm going to do reset all, which generates the checklist incomplete norm. Then I'm going to go to normal menu, pre-flight, and now I'm going to override this checklist because we can't do it because we're already underway. Then I'm going to go to normal before start. I'm going to override normal before taxi, override normal before takeoff. Before takeoff, checklist complete, and then close the checklist. If I press it again, it brings up the next checklist, which is after takeoff. That's correct. So that's what's going on with that system. And you'll see that no matter how many times I press it, it can still go to the after takeoff because that's not complete yet. So now it's in the right order for our flight. Great. Let us now release the parking brake. Always fun. There we go. And spool up the engines. Remember, 55% M1. A little bit of forward pressure on the yoke. And then press a little cross. And now here's our thrust ref FMA. Toga toga. All good. Engine's now driving towards 92.6, which they've reached. So that's thrust set, which we want to do before 80 knots. keeping it straight, looking outside, 80 knots, stick to neutral, goes into hold mode on that FMA, which is no problem. We just leave it alone, and we keep looking down the runway, keeping it straight. Heavy takeoff. There's 11-hour flight, about half full of passengers and cargo, but with all that extra fuel, this makes it a heavy takeoff indeed, using the whole runway. And we are quite derated. V1. Rotate. Nice and gentle. Let it stand up. Probably a bit fast that again. That's gear up. LNAV. And you'll notice we haven't even reached 15 degrees. We're having to lower the nose slightly because this is just a heavy aeroplane. And now we follow that flight director. So got thrust ref, LNAV, VNAV speed. I'm just going to put the autopilot on to keep talking to you. And there's AP, thrust ref, LNAV, VNAV speed, autopilot, and we're climbing away. Ignore the insufficient fuel message. Something to note is as we set the takeoff thrust here in this replay, have a look at the inboard aileron, see how it droops down now. That's because hydraulic pressure is removed at the start of the takeoff roll when thrust is set to remove unwanted stress on that control. The airflow then gradually lifts it up as the air flows over it, generating lift on it, and then it rises above the wing, and then pressure is restored as the jet wash is being moved away from it, and it can safely be restored and put back into the right position. This is true on the 777 and the 787. Great to see it simulated correctly here. Right, we're turning around to the left because we're in lateral navigation mode, so it's following our departure. It's going to follow this line. I love that you can see your aeroplane on here. Very good. As we pass 1500 feet, it's going to change to climb, and there's climb 2. Thrust will come back slightly, so it's gently reducing, and the nose will lower, and it's now accelerating towards 250. Notice it's sitting at 240. That's because the flap limit speed, so once we raise the flaps, that speed will increase. Above the green 5, the next number is a 1, and we're above 5, so I can go to 1. 1. And this is a bit awkward because you can see our target speed's below our up speed, but it doesn't matter because it's going to go to 250. So above the 1, flaps to 1, oh sorry, up. And then watch this. This limit on the, this is because of the flaps being down, it can then raise the target. It's quite a clever system. The Airbus would actually keep driving through it, whereas this one will actually limit it. It's quite good. And there's through our up at 250, we've got our landing gear up, and away we go. Awesome. Now remember, 6,000 feet, our first restriction is 3,000 or above at this waypoint, which is shown on the navigation display. So once it's made that restriction, the 4,000 or above will go to magenta to show us that's now the restriction it's obeying. Now, as I said earlier, what if this was a below? Say it was 4,000 or below, but air traffic says climb now to 6,000 feet. Don't stop at 4,000. You can actually override any restriction in there. So the 4,000 now has got magenta, you can see. But if I want to skip it, I can actually press on the altitude button. So if you've put in a new altitude in the window and it's not doing it, possibly because of a restriction, you just click this little button, and you'll see there, it removed that restriction, and it jumps to the next one, which is now in magenta, which is flight level 60 at Maxit. Now it's not a flight level, it should be an altitude. If I go to VNAV, we can see the transition altitude is 6,000, so yeah, that should be an altitude still. But there we go. So to clear that restriction, you would click in, just literally click here, and it will jump to the next one. Speed VNAV path. So what if I were to wind the window up? Let's say air traffic says now, climb to flight level 100. What if I put 100 in the window? The airplane will still, because it's in magenta, obey this flight level 60 restriction. You'll see here it's in VNAV path, so it thinks it's in the right place. So here we go, it's going to level at 6,000, even though it's not shown on the PFD. This is very different to the Airbus, which would tell you where it's going to level off on the PFD. The Boeing just doesn't. So we're now stuck at 6,000, but air traffic have said, no, ignore that, go to 10. What do we do? Well, you can override it by putting it into vertical speed, so pressing VS and climbing in a vertical speed, or you can press FLITCH, flight level change. you press that button, it will drive itself up towards 10,000 feet. And we'll talk a bit more about that mode in just a minute. But of course, we can also do, as we just discussed, and click on the 10,000, and it will then immediately delete that restriction and start its climb. So if you find yourself stuck at a level and it's not going when you want it to, try clicking in the button or go to a more basic mode. Now, once we clear the maxit waypoint, which we're about to do, it will actually delete that restriction, and because it's in VNAV path, it will then continue its climb according to what it was planning, which is going to be all the way up to cruise now, because you can see there's no more restrictions after that. So watch what happens as we cross maxit. This took me a little while to get my my head around this. It's very different. You also need to keep updating the heading bug, which is just unbelievable. There we go. So we crossed maxit. It's removed the restriction. There's no more amber on there. It's not obeying any more constraints because there's no more off them now. And it's gone thrust ref VNAV speed. So it's saying thrust ref because it's targeting the climb thrust, and it's just going to carry on up to 100. Now here's the key thing. It will not go above the altitude in this window. So it's going to maintain, as in VNAV speed, and it's going to climb up to flight level 100, but it will maintain 100. Let's set standard as we climb up to a flight level. And there we go, 100 as flight level. So it's going to now maintain 100 even though it wants to go higher. The mode it's climbing in, interestingly, is VNAV speed. This means that although it's in the vertical profile, what it's planning to do is use climb thrust, and then it will change the angle it's climbing at based on the speed you target. So it's going to hold climb thrust and maintain that speed. Now the speed is being dictated by the box, so you can see 298 knots down here, 298 knots, that's because we're below 100, so it will eventually go to 299 knots. If I go to VNAV, you can see it has a speed of 250 below 100. This is a normal speed, you would have that in place, but I can actually delete it. If I delete that restriction and execute, remember if that light comes on you have to execute it, it will now accelerate to its targeting climb speed, 320 knots. So air traffic control might say to you, oh, you're free speed, you can accelerate now. So if they do that, you just go to VNAV and delete that restriction. I can put it back in again. I could say 250 knots below flight level 120, because remember this is the climb page. If I type that in and execute, it will now reduce the speed back to 250 knots. So let's just delete that and let the airplane climb. Right, so we're in VNAV speed. So like I say, it's going to climb using the speed target here and the climb thrust. If you want to climb a bit faster, you can click on the window. Let's imagine they clear us up now to flight level 200 just to get out of the way. If you want to climb a bit faster, you can open the speed window by clicking on this and then winding the speed back, and watch what happens. 280 knots, and the nose will rise, because remember, it's in VNAV speed, it's controlling the speed on the elevator. There's flight level 100. At flight level 100, you can turn off the landing lights. You might let your passengers walk around if it's not too bumpy. And what we should have done by this point is the after takeoff checklist, after takeoff checklist complete, and then press checklist again to close it. And you'll see now if I press it again, the next one will be the descent checklist. So we're not going to do that yet. Now if I want to let the airplane choose the speed again, I can just click it in and it will lower the nose and accelerate. And if I want to climb a bit faster, remember, click it in and wind it back. So to let the airplane use its calculated speed, a bit like a managed climb in the Airbus, you're going to push that in and put it into VNAV mode. But there are other modes. We could put it into vertical speed mode. If I do that, we then have speed, vertical speed, and now the pitch is controlling the vertical speed and the throttles are controlling the speed because the speed is on the left side. So if the speed is written on this left column, it means your engines will control the speed. If it's on the right, it means your elevator will control the speed. So if I now wind the speed window back below our current speed, you'll see that the engines spool back because the speed is being controlled by the throttle, and the vertical speed of 3,000 feet per minute is being targeted, or 3,300 is being targeted by the elevator. So if I push vertical speed down to 1,500 feet per minute or 1,000 feet per minute, the nose will lower and the airplane will fly 1,000 feet per minute. This is not a normal way to climb the airplane, but it is used when you're trying to climb the airplane with traffic around you. So let's say if we were being cleared, if air traffic suddenly said to us, stop your climb flight level 150, then it would be good to be at or 160. You'd lower your vertical speed a bit. And now the airplane will climb, and remember, it will not go above this altitude in the window. This MCP altitude is a hard limit. It won't go through it in the climb in this context. So there you go, vertical speed. If I want to go back into the airplane choosing everything, you simply press VNAV, and that will close the window, and you can see the speed window's closed, it's targeting its climb speed, and we go back to thrust ref, VNAV speed. So again, speed is being controlled by the elevator, thrust is being set to thrust reference, so just climb thrust. Now there is another mode. Let's go to 150 and let's just level off there. Check out targets complaining because we're off the vertical profile, but there we go. So speed VNAV out. So it's saying VNAV out because it's upset that we're sat at 150. It can't do what it wants to do. If I was to put in 17, let's put 160, I can press flight level change and it would just simply change up to that next level. What it would do is set a thrust to try and do that within 2 minutes, and if it can't do it within 2 minutes, it will do it as quickly as it can outside of that. So if it's a big change, it would just go to maximum thrust and it will climb up. We'll see the reverse of this in the descent video, but there we go. So in flitch speed, we get thrust on the left. So what thrust is it targeting? Well, you'll notice it's not thrust ref, it's just thrust. That's because it chooses the thrust it thinks will give it 2 minutes to the next level, which in this case is a little bit less. So you can see here it's actually reducing that thrust because it's going a bit too quickly. It only needs to be doing about 500 feet per minute. So it's going to reduce that thrust back, and it's also got flitch speed. So speed is being controlled by, guess what, the elevator. You'll see it open the speed window, so you could wind that back and get the nose to rise quicker. So if I was to put it into, let's go to 190 flitch, thrust, flitch speed. So now that's 3,000 feet away. So it's going to set a thrust it thinks is suitable and then control the speed on the elevator. I'll be honest, flitch isn't used much in the climb. Most often you just go into VNAV, let the airplane choose its, because this is the most efficient. This is what it's planned to do. So if you do anything different from this, you're just spending fuel that the airplane isn't expecting to. So thrust ref, VNAV speed, climbing up to 190. And you can do this all the way up to your climb cruise level. So if you go to your VNAV page, your climb page shows you your initial cruise altitude and the speed it's going to fly. But if I press next page, you can see here the 2 of 3. So climb just gives us 1 of 3 because we're in the climb phase. Press next, you get 2 of 3. This is your cruise page and it shows you the levels you can reach. So we're cruising at 310 because it was entered into the FMS. But the airplane actually wants us to be at 320, recommending 330. So I would actually ask a traffic control, can I actually have flight level 330 please? And hopefully they'd say yes, and we'll go straight up because it's below the maximum. You wouldn't want to climb up to your very maximum level, so I wouldn't go to flight level 340 just yet because you'll have a small margin on the speed tape, and if you enter turbulence and things like that, it's a little bit uncomfortable because you could get a bit too close to overspeeding or underspeeding. The reason we're so low initially, we can only go to 330, is because of the weight of the airplane. Remember, we are in a heavy machine right now. I don't know where the 777, because the 787 shows you your gross weight all the time. The 777 doesn't seem to do that. So, yeah. Our gross weight right now is 290 tons. Heavy. This is a heavy aeroplane. You'll see this insufficient fuel message keeps coming up. That's because the plan is not quite matching what it expects. But I actually know that my fuel figures are slightly different to what it has there. So I can change the reserves if I go to index perf, and I don't actually need 12.3 tons. You change it to whatever you think your final reserve fuel, so that's the fuel you need in case you have to hold for half an hour. So final reserve fuel, you have to have that in tanks 2.9 plus our alternate fuel of 6.8. So let me just work that out, 2.9 plus 6.8. So actually only 9.7 tons. Oh, so type in 9.7 and then that will get rid of the warning because we are actually going to land with plenty more than that, 12.1 tons at the moment. Once you're underway, you are allowed to put in the arrival. So for now, remember, there's no arrival loaded in. You don't load the arrival on a Boeing on these long haul Boeings until you are underway, so that it doesn't mess up the sequencing during the departure. So that is something to note, something certainly different to the Airbus. Just sweeping up the flight deck then to get everything a bit more correct. All the landing lights off, the runway turn-off lights off, taxi light off, strobe light can stay on, beacon and nav lights would stay on. If you had the logo light on, because it was dark, just shines a light on the tail, you can turn that off at 10,000 feet as well. I'm going to leave no smoking on, of course, but I'm going to put the seatbelts to auto. That removes the passenger sign, leaves with no smoking on. 787 doesn't bother showing you that, thankfully, for the whole flight. Beautiful, beautiful sunny day out there, but that means it's far too bright. We don't want to sit in too much brightness, so we'll start getting some sunshades ready. That's more like it. Can I drag this around? I can. Excellent, excellent. So this is a once you're up in the cruise. You maybe wouldn't do this during the climb, but yeah, once you're up in the cruise, you'd find all the sunshades start coming out. Everyone wants the flight deck as cool and dark as possible, because you're about to spend 12 hours sitting in potentially the sunshine, especially if you took off in the morning. And there we go. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I need to show you. So you're in climb mode, and yeah. Make sure your bank angle is on auto. If you set it to one of these others, it will limit it. So yeah, and keep updating your heading bug. And that brings me actually to the next point, which is the lateral modes. So we're in LNAV. We've been in LNAV this whole time, which is lateral navigation. But air traffic control might say to you, can you turn right now for traffic heading 180? So put 180 in the window, and then you click on the little cell, because I want to be in select. Now I'm in heading select, and it will turn to 180. And remember, bank angle in auto. Oh, there. If you set it to stay 5 degrees, it will only allow the airplane to bank to 5, and you'll overshoot turns, and it could lead you into some problems. Gonna make sure traffic's on as well, actually, in airports. Remember, your eFish you can use to display these things. So there's a VOR showing, there's other airports showing, and I press traffic to show me other airplanes. So now we're in heading select mode, not LNAV mode, and the airplane will follow the heading bug. Just put this back to auto. There we go, and that will allow the airplane to adjust its bank angle based on the speed and altitude and so on. So heading 180, and it will just follow the heading bug because it's in heading cell. So it will just, if I go, let's turn it left, let's say they change their mind and say 165, and it will just turn towards it. Really straightforward. Easy. That's pretty good, right? But what if they say, they put you on your heading of, I don't know, 190, and then they say, okay, now you can route direct to waypoint AirTrat. How do we do that? Well, I'm going to go down to my CDU. I'm going to press legs page. I want to be on legs page 1, and we can see the waypoints. The magenta waypoint is the next sequenced waypoint, AirTrat, which needs to be in front of you. So AirTrat's in front of us. But we're not flying directly towards it. You can see we've been put onto this heading 190, and now they're telling us to fly direct to AirTrat. So you'll see that if I press LNAV, it won't actually be able to do it because we're not pointing at LNAV. LNAV is just this magenta line. So press LNAV, and the airplane won't do anything. It arms it, LNAV is underneath there, but because we're never going to intercept that line, it won't ever go into that mode. So one thing we could do is, if you were to point yourself at the line, so if I bring the heading bug round and point at that magenta line, as it gets close, it will intercept it because it's armed, it's in white here on the PFD. So then the airplane will actually intercept the magenta line and head out to AirTrat. Now that's fine, but that's not what they told us to do. That's just a way to get yourself back on your original track. They said fly direct to AirTrat. So to do that, what I'm going to do, and there you go, it gives us the warning, not on intercept heading, because we're pointing away from that lateral navigation line. It's warning us you're never going to intercept it, you're just going to fly in heading select forever. So what can we do? We can actually go direct to it by selecting the waypoints. So click on it, and then click it again. It appears at the top. You see the white line there, which is the planned line. It looks good, remember? White execute button, execute, and now it's there. And you'll see the airplane has gone into LNAV because we had it armed. And now we're on that magenta line, it can fly it, it's happy, removes that warning message, we go straight to AirTrat. Now there's some gotchas with this compared to the Airbus, and I'm going to show you those now. If we're in heading select, like we are, I'll just put it back in heading select. Let's say they say fly direct to Delta Victor Lima, Deauville. So I'm going to put Delta Victor Lima to the top, so I just select it, and this is true, you can select any waypoint, even if it's not on page 1. So I could go down here and select Amboise, so I could select it. Previous page, to page 1, make sure you go to page 1 and then put it at the top left of that page. There's our white line, it's over there, and then execute, remember? It all looks sensible. There it is. 150 miles away. Not unreasonable, you get very long directs on the long haul. But we're not going towards it, are we? Why not? Well, this time I didn't have LNAV armed. I never pressed this LNAV button. So even though I've told it I want to go direct to Amboise, unlike the Airbus, the airplane has decided, well, you're not going to go there because you're in heading select and you haven't told me otherwise. So you can see we're just turning off the waypoint. And the longer I leave it, the worse this situation gets because we're turning away from that magenta line. So now, if I press LNAV, it will go into it, but it's going to have to fly back to that line. So what you need to do, if you ever get a direct from air traffic, is you enter it, execute, and then straight away put it into LNAV if it isn't already. you can see here that all this turning is actually taking a lot of energy out of the airplane. Anyway, it's in speed VNAV path there, try to level off, so I click the button, up we go. You need to make sure as well, if you do climb higher, make sure that your new cruise altitude is shown in there. But it's, yeah, manoeuvring around at this altitude with these turns, it's a good way to suck energy out of the airplane, and at the start of the flight like this, we are low on energy. Glorious machine though, glorious. But there we are, finally up and underway. Contrails as well. And here we are, up in the cruise, so now it's time to get on with those cruise things. I have a video on the channel about what long-haul pilots do in the cruise, where I talk about planning alternates, ETOPS, things like that. But most importantly, let's think about what we're going to do right now. First of all, let's go to our TCAS panel and set it to below, just to show us any traffic beneath us in case we have to do an emergency descent for any reason. You would start thinking about your ETOPS alternates and whereabouts they are compared to you. Over Europe, of course, not an issue. We have Paris below us. We have all sorts of airports all around us. Paris is just over there. But yeah, so that's not such an issue today. But again, my long-haul cruise video will explain a lot more detail on all of this. We've already turned the passenger signs off and the lights off, so there's not actually a lot to do with the airplane once we get up here. But something that is useful to do is you would plan your arrival. So I'll show this again in the descent tutorial, but you would go departure arrival, index page, and then your destination, which in this case FACT, arrival, and then you can put in your runway and start planning it out. Remember, that will actually change because at the moment our arrival time and fuel is based on not having any arrival in, so the fuel will go down and the time will get a bit later, probably by about 5 to 10 minutes, and you'll lose a few hundred kilos of fuel because you haven't got any arrival in there. So that's extra miles, isn't it, as you fly, because you won't fly straight into the airport like it's currently planning. Another thing we want to do is step climbs. It's important. Remember, we're only at 330. This is not efficient. We don't want to spend the whole flight here. So as we burn off fuel, the airplane's going to tell us when to climb. And here we have them. Step 2, 350. So this is on the VNAV page. So it wants to climb to 3.5. Remember, you'd only go up, you'd either do odds or even levels. So we're currently doing odd levels. So we're at 330. So we can't climb to 3.4. It'll be 3.5. In oceanic airspace, that's different. But where we are now, that's what we'd do. So 350, and then the next will be 370. So it says step to 350, and it tells us when. At 1725Z, which is in 939 nautical miles. So quite a long way away. At that point, it thinks the airplane will be light enough, and that will be the sensible place to be. You can see here the recommended level 330, so we're at the right place, which is good news. So as the flight continues, that will do it. PMDG does have a way you can set this to auto cruise. So auto cruise, you can have auto step climbs on. So if you go to your AFB and click on it, you can turn on auto step climbs, you can have it pause at the top of descent, and you can turn on auto time compression up to 4 times. I'll try up to 8 times, see if it can do that. And there we go. And now you'll see straight away it's reducing the flight. There you go. Sorry, increasing this time, and we're moving faster. And that way you might be able to simulate a proper long haul flight in a much shorter space of time. Quite a clever feature. I quite like that. 8's struggling a little bit for my computer. I don't want to do too much recording like this, but there we go. And that way you can get to your cruise, and you'll see here the numbers counting down, 900 miles, and it will step climb. Now the real airplane will only step climb when you tell it to, so you would have to wind in the new altitude and then click it, as I said earlier, and that will then drive the airplane up to the next level. If you have auto step climb, you won't need to do that. It will do it itself, so if you want to go away from your computer. So again, a neat feature, because if you were to try and fly the whole way at 330, you'd find that you might run short of fuel, or you would run short of fuel. You'd certainly burn plenty extra. Good. So yeah, step climb will be the next event. So there we go. Hopefully that's given you a good idea of how to get your airplane all the way from the runway up into the cruise in a realistic manner. Not much to do on the overhead panel once we're underway on these long haul Boeings. Really very little, just the lights, maybe the passenger signs, and that's pretty much it. This is only going to get used now if there's an abnormal situation, or maybe you want to change the temperature in the flight deck. You can monitor the systems. If you click on these buttons up here, it will bring them up on this lower MFD, which is currently set to the MFD, because I have it set to lower center. This is the screen I'm controlling. Something that's of note is if I set my navigation display to the MFD option, it by default is a navigation display, but I can now press the left inboard, because this is the left inboard screen, this would be the right inboard screen, and now choose the system. So press elect, and look, we get the electrical page over here. So now I'm controlling, because I've got the left inboard selected, I'm controlling my navigation display. Now, it's set to MFD because I'm allowed to change it around, but if I press the button twice, so I'm on the fuel page, press it again, and it would go back to the navigation display, it would default back to it. I can bring up the checklist here as well, but if I press checklist again, it goes away, comes back to navigation, doors, goes away. So double click on it to get rid of it, and that's what you want to do. But if I go to lower center, I can press checklist there, get rid of that. So yeah, and you can do the same with the right inboard, of course. I could change that to fuel, put it back. Now, if your screen is set to just nav, then you cannot do that. If it's on nav, it will no longer let me change it around. It will only change the bottom. See, I can't select the left inboard, but there you go. It's a little bit of trivia about the screens. So that's all for today's video. I hope it's been useful for you. A bit of a guide on how the Boeing vertical modes work and how we get these long-haul aircraft all the way up into the cruise. It is quite different to the A320 family, but hopefully this has given you all the information you need to get yourself underway and get yourself to try out some of these long-haul flights. I think it's great to have these step climb features and so on built into the EFB and the auto cruise to increase the time, because I think that will give people a few more options to let their simulators run. Although I know there'll be plenty out there who want to run it in real time, because after all, aren't we striving for reality in these simulators so often? There'll be more tutorials and guides coming on the channel, so do please subscribe if you'd like to see those, where I'll talk about how to fly the descent, approach, and of course landing of the Boeing 777-300ER. It's still a fantastic time to be using Microsoft Flight Simulator, and this is a remarkable add-on, so I hope you'll join me for those. That's it then. Thank you so much for watching. Please do keep safe and well. Bye bye.